All right, folks. Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Counter Media Podcast. Man, we cannot stop winning. We got so much stuff to cover. It's not even funny. The press can't even keep up with Trump. I can't keep up with Trump. We're winning left and right. And in one video I'm going to show you guys at the end of it, we actually Trump's commerce secretary actually lays out the real enemy to the United States. What do you got going on tonight, Chris?
Oh, I'm just enjoying. I'm in a better mood today. You know, Trump was upsetting me with the Gaza stuff, but he's winning me back. You might notice Trump's back. The bobblehead is back because Trump's doing the right thing. This is the indicator of how I'm feeling about Trump from show to show. Right now, I'm happy. He's doing good stuff with Ukraine, saying a lot of stuff that I like, upsetting all the wrong people. So we're back. We are back. Really, I've been bullied into submission. You know, the chat wasn't happy with my criticism, so I guess I'm coming back into the fold. No, but seriously, I am happy with Trump handling this Ukraine thing, being a bit more realistic. Everything has been so unrealistic, basically saying, you know, Ukraine's going to get Crimea back and Ukraine's going to get this back and we won't settle for a loss of anything, which is just ridiculous. And they're still pushing for NATO membership, which just makes no sense. But Hexas and Trumps, they've come in with a bit of realism, which is good to see. And all the clowns of the world are fuming. And we'll probably show a bit of that tonight.
I love this comment. Oh, that wasn't one. It moved on me. Trump is your daddy, Chris. Face it.
Don't make me take it down. All right, I got to back up. Don't push it. Otherwise, he's gone.
You don't want to take daddy down. Don't take that.
Hey, I've shown I will do it. I will take Trump down. Okay.
You will. Master negotiator right there. Don't leave anything on the table.
In fact, Trump must have seen our last two shows, realized I wasn't happy, and thought, look, I got to throw Chris a bone. How about we end the Ukraine war?
He moderated his speech a little bit just to make you feel better. Hit you right in the feels. So anyways, folks, I want to say hi to everybody. Make sure you like, subscribe. Make sure you share this. If you're not following us over on X, make sure you go do that. You got Christopher Todd Nolan on X as well as Paramount Actual on X.
At Chris Todd Nolan, actually. I think I chop off
Chris Todd Nolan.
Christopher, you
dumbed it down a little bit.
The display name is Christopher, but the handle is at Chris Todd Nolan.
Gotcha.
Thank you very much.
Good. Well, let's jump right into this because I'll tell you, man, we are literally, I was going through the different topics that we could have covered tonight, and we're missing about 10 of them, but we got about 5 or 6 topics that we're going to cover that I think are just good news all around for the American people.
America has helped many countries throughout the years at great financial cost. It is now time that these countries remember what we've done for them and treat us fairly. We want a level playing field for all American workers. We want a level playing field for the United States of America. I've instructed my Secretary of State, my Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of the Treasury, and the United States Trade Representative to do all the necessary work to deliver reciprocity. In other words, reciprocal reciprocity to our system of trade. So we're going to have a reciprocal tax. Whatever they charge, we charge.
I love this. Like, why was this not done many moons ago? I mean, the fact of the matter is there's a country that's importing their goods to the greatest country in the world that has more buying power than any other country in the world, and then we ship our goods to them and they hit us with a tax. Why are we not taxing those? Like, this is the most common sense thing that could have ever been done. We've been losing billions in the trade wars, and there's absolutely no reason to. None whatsoever. So this is just as common sense as it gets, and I love it.
If they don't let us in, we're going to determine a value for that. But overall, it's going to be a very simple system. Whatever they charge, we charge. So nobody can complain. I don't think anybody can complain. And I'm going to sign this. And the numbers are going to be very fair, but staggering. They're going to be large, but very fair. And this should have been done years ago. And I did it in a different form with tariffs and taxes on China. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars. No other president, as you know, ever took in 10 cents. But that was a few countries. That wasn't what we're doing now. Now we're doing it with every country. So this is every country. And essentially, when they treat us fairly, we treat them fairly. It's a very fair way of doing it. And I don't know that it's ever been done before, but that's the way. I'd like to ask Secretary of Commerce to say a few words, please, Howard.
So reciprocal tariffs sound fair, but when you understand how brutally unfair the world's trading has been since we opened ourselves up after World War II, right? We tried to export the power of our economy to rebuild the world. And what happened since then is everyone else has taken advantage of us. Some countries, like the VAT that the president spoke about, 20% on everything we sell, just casually. And when they sell to us, of course, they drop that 20 right away. So it's sort of an export subsidy, if you will. So we are going to address each country one by one. But here's the key. They'll get an invitation to trade with the greatest consumer economy in the world.
Yeah.
In exchange for trading at the greatest consumer economy in the world, you have to treat us the way we're going to treat you. It's going to be the same, but no more inviting bad people to the party.
Now, I want everybody to pay attention right here, especially you, Chris. I want you to pay attention to who the bad people are, the axis of evil economically.
So what the president spoke about with Mexico and Canada is we gave them the greatest invitation ever. Right? You're our neighbor, you're our friend, trade for free with us. And what did they do? China came in, right? Steel done by India, aluminum done by Australia. You have Australian aluminum mines operating at 90%.
90.
And U.S. aluminum mines and aluminum production 50%. We're going out of business, and they're using Canada to come in. So the president is...
You hear that, Chris? You hear that, Chris? Australia, freaking aluminum axis of evil, freaking beating us at a game that they shouldn't. Your aluminum sucks, by the way. I just want you to know.
Well, obviously not. Obviously, it's selling like hotcakes. And by the way, we call it aluminium. Thank you very much. And look, I can understand Trump's perspective with the America First sort of tariff stuff, but that one stings a little bit because we were supposed to do some kind of deal because there isn't too much of a deficit with Australia. And our Prime Minister Albanese called Trump, as soon as Trump mentioned the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium, thank you very much, they had a call and we were trying to get an exemption. And Trump said, yeah, we'll think about that. But he didn't. He's like, no exemption, Australia, 25% on all your steel and aluminium, which I get it. That's America First, good for you. But from Australia, okay, that's...
Well, you know what?
But Trump isn't here to please me. So, look, I get it. I'm not going to get too upset about it.
Right. You can go ahead and take your bobblehead down now if you want. Because you guys
no, look, I get it. I get the principle. Australia should do similar kind of stuff.
All the indigenous people that you guys have down there digging those mines are now going to be out of work.
I don't think that's who's doing the mining.
I think you guys are doing slave labor.
I don't. No, I don't think. I'll just say no comment on that one. But I don't think they're the ones doing the work there. I'll just put it that way.
Well, let me. We will get back to this because we got a lot more to cover on this.
Keenly aware, keenly focused on changing this model. We will be fair to each country, but no inviting any other country in.
This is a big one.
Yeas are 52, nays are 48. Nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered, made, and laid upon the table.
So for all of you naysayers out there that said Tulsi wasn't going to get pushed through, wasn't going to get the nomination, wasn't going to get the votes, you're wrong. Because, again, what I do know was happening behind the scenes was Trump was calling up those senators. Trump was calling up everybody and letting them know what was going to happen if they didn't play his game and actually push through his nominees, which, again, there were some things out there with, oh, God, I'm forgetting his name.
RFK?
No. The freaking Republican senator.
McConnell?
Yeah, Mitch McConnell. So Mitch McConnell obviously didn't vote for her, but yet he voted for every single one of Obama and or Biden's nominees. And this is what we see time and time again. We got the Uniparty, the anti-Trump party is really what it is, and it's the anti-American party. And, you know, I don't even know why Mitch McConnell's still there. He's worse than Biden. He's sitting there drooling on himself, getting pushed in on a wheelchair. He is completely unfit for service. Get him the F out of politics, and let's make room for some new blood for sure.
I think in one of the presses that we'll probably cover, Trump's got some choice words from McConnell, which is always good to see.
I didn't see that. So
but
I'm
yeah,
looking for that one.
Yeah, he's obviously not happy, so he sort of digs the boot in a little bit, echoes some of your statements. But yeah, for me, I remember that when McConnell sort of froze up. Remember that press conference, and he sort of, it's like that should have been, okay, thanks for your service, but time to retire to the greener pastures now. But he's still there, you know, with power and legislating stuff.
He needs to fully retire because right now he's just semi-retarded. All right, hold on.
The president will immediately notify of the Senate's actions.
Mr. President, I move.
Objection.
In accordance with the provisions of Rule.
They also talk about JFK and that.
All right, and we were just listening in there.
He's here for a reason, and he is focused every day on implementing his administration's goals and sending $59 million to a migrant hotel to house illegal immigrants when there are still people in North Carolina and California who have not received FEMA funding is not something that this administration is going to tolerate.
Now, FEMA is under the microscope right now. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency shining a light on the recent New York City payment just weeks after President Trump formed that task force to fix FEMA.
Tonight, News 13's Justin Berger is taking our questions to Congressman Chuck Edwards, who is part of the president's task force to fix FEMA.
There were FEMA staff that were let go that made this decision about the funding. Do you think that was the right choice?
I totally thought this guy was Sebastian Gorka with like some really bad lens pointing at him or something, some fisheye lens on him.
I think that that was exactly the right choice.
Secretary Kristi Noem posting on X Wednesday afternoon, quote, I've
clawed back the full payment the FEMA deep state activists unilaterally gave to the New York City migrant hotels. FEMA was funding the Roosevelt Hotel that serves as Tren de Agua. Base of operation was used to house Laken Riley's killer. Folks, the amount of waste, fraud, and abuse, and not just waste, fraud, and abuse, but the way that this federal government under Biden has been funding these left, loony, anti-American causes at the scale at which they were doing it is absolutely criminal. And he's lucky he gave out so many freaking pardons because there should be a lot of people in jail right now.
Clawed back the full.
We'll skip through that. This is another big one.
We have filed charges against the state of New York. We have filed charges against Kathy Hope.
Real quick, I don't know why they're saying filed charges. They filed lawsuits. I don't know. I think it undermines the message here a little bit when they're saying filed charges when that's not the case, but regardless.
We have filed charges against Letitia James and Mark Schroeder, who is with DMV. This is a new DOJ, and we are taking steps to protect Americans, American citizens, and angel moms, like the mom standing right behind me, who you're going to hear from in a moment. New York has chosen to prioritize illegal aliens over American citizens. It stops today. As you know, we sued Illinois, and New York didn't listen. So now you're next. Millions of illegal aliens with violent records have flooded into our communities, bringing violence and deadly drugs with them. With me today, I'm so proud to be joined by Tammy Nobles. Tammy is an angel mom. Her beautiful daughter, Kayla Hamilton, was murdered by an MS-13 member in 2022. Kayla had just turned 20 years old, and she was raped and murdered by someone who should not have been in our country. Yet, he was released, flown to Maryland, where he committed this violent murder. I just want you to hear from Tammy. Tammy represents not only herself and her family, but all of the great angel moms around this country who have suffered because of what the Biden administration did, and it is over.
Absolutely.
Look forward to working very closely with him and his.
So real quick, we're going to get into Ukraine, but I think the way to predicate that discussion is definitely jump in. I love everything that Pete Hegseth has done with the DOD. I think, I said it the other day, I'm going to say it again. He may be a little unconventional pick, but that's exactly what we've needed, just like Trump's an unconventional president. I think he's done an excellent job of everything that I've researched that he's been doing within DOD. I know troop morale is up. I love, man, the balls on this guy to say some of the things that he says right here at the headquarters of UN, I think is phenomenal. But you guys weigh in as we play this.
Just before you do, I do have, because I sort of have laid out sort of a chronological order, because this sort of came after a few other things, because he spoke a few other times. So, because I've got this like later on.
Would you like
so
to
if you
play
got like
that?
a little bit, maybe if you got just a little segment of this to play it. If you got a fair bit, we can maybe come to it later.
It's fairly long. All right, we'll play.
Yeah, can we maybe come back to this part a little bit later once we've teed it up? Because I reckon the best way to start it would be talking about Trump's phone calls. All right, well, here we go. So this is Trump. He spoke to Putin. I reckon I should just read this out. Okay. I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we both fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people and we, likewise, lost so many. We each talked about the strength of our respective nations and the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately, and we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now. I have asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Ambassador and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president, but it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost. I want to thank President Putin for his time and effort with respect to this call and for the release yesterday of Mark Fogel, a wonderful man that I personally greeted last night at the White House. I believe this effort will lead to a successful conclusion, hopefully soon. So that's sort of what kicked a lot of it off. And I've got the next True Social, unless you want to comment on that before we get to it, where he then spoke to Zelensky and he talked about that call as well.
The video I'm getting ready to play kind of sets. We could have played that ahead before this, actually, because he doesn't get into. He just talks about NATO more than he's not talking about the actual Ukraine. So let's play that real quick, and then we'll get directly into Ukraine, which is what you're doing right here.
Talking about what we've done at the ministerial, I want to reaffirm a few things from this podium. First, as we see it, NATO's strategic objectives are to prevent great power conflict in Europe, deter nuclear and non-nuclear aggression, and defeat threats to treaty allies should deterrence fail. Second, the U.S. is committed to building a stronger, more lethal NATO. However, we must ensure that European and Canadian commitment to Article 3 of this treaty is just as strong. Article 3 says that allies, and I quote, by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. Leaders of our European allies should take primary responsibility for defense of the continent. And that begins with increasing defense spending.
Yeah, so this has been an ongoing problem with Europe, Canada, Mexico too, is they've relied on the umbrella in the defense that we, the United States, provide each and every single one of them. Our strong defense, they know they're under NATO, so they don't think they have to, number one, defend themselves. They don't have to spend the money that we spend on a military budget. They're spending a very small percentage of their GDP on their own defense, much less contributing to NATO, which he talks about more, which has been a real problem. So number one, America is getting screwed at every angle. We're getting screwed on the economy. We're getting screwed when it comes to commerce between these, because these countries that we're providing defense for, by the way, are now have the audacity to tax us on everything that we send in the country for them to consume, but then we're allowing them free trade and free imports to the United States. It's absolutely insane how many instances and how many aspects that our leaders have allowed the world to get over on the United States. We have been held back in every regard, and it's absolutely disgusting. And I love to hear what he has to say on this.
2% is a start, as President Trump has said, but it's not enough. Nor is 3%, nor is 4%, more like 5%. Real investment, real urgency. We can talk all we want about values. Values are important. But you can't shoot values. You can't shoot flags, and you can't shoot strong speeches. There is no replacement for hard power. We discussed Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. I had the chance to brief allies on President Trump's top priority, a diplomatic, peaceful end to this war, as quickly as possible, in a manner that creates enduring and durable peace. President Trump gave me a clear mission: achieve peace through strength, as well as put America first, our people, our taxpayers, our borders, and our security. We are doing this by reviving the warrior ethos, rebuilding our military, and reestablishing deterrence. NATO should pursue these goals as well. Our partners must do far more for Europe's defense. We must make NATO great again. After World War II, first General and then President Eisenhower was one of NATO's strongest supporters. He believed in
I'll just say, I generally agree with all this, but I'm almost against NATO altogether. I reckon the whole thing should be disbanded. But if it's going to be there, this all makes sense. But 100%. Ultimately, my dream would be why do we even need it for? Just let's make peace with Russia, all get along. But while it's here, this all makes sense, everything you're saying. I just had to put that in, that'd be the dream one day. I don't even think NATO it probably should have been disbanded after the Soviet Union, but...
Yeah, there was too much in place. There was too many people relying on it. There's too many budgets, too much money going towards it. It's just like any other freaking social program. It's a military social program for the world is what it is. And you can't get rid of it once it's started. It's just like anything else we start.
Yeah.
Strong relationship with Europe. However, by the end of Eisenhower's presidency, even he was concerned that Europe was not shouldering enough of its own defense, nearly making, in Eisenhower's words, quote, a sucker out of Uncle Sam. Well, like President Eisenhower, this administration believes in alliances, deeply believes in alliances. But make no mistake, President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker.
Bam. We're not Uncle Sucker. Europe, Canada, Australia, with your freaking aluminium. Your mic's muted for some reason, Chris. I don't know why. It actually sounds better now.
Yeah, you've used that one before. You're getting a little bit hacky with the jokes. You're just repeating the old things.
It works. It works. Oldie but a goodie.
Yeah. No, I was being considerate. I poured a little bit more water in my little cup, making a bunch of noise. I thought I'd be considerate to the audience and mute that.
Yeah,
I just forgot to come back on.
Little tiny Australian cups.
Well, it's just convenient. It's the lid of the thermo, whatever you call it, thing. I got the lid.
Is that made out of aluminium?
Probably the best in the world. Anyway. But anyway, like, yeah, so that's all good. That was one of the more recent presses. So, look, Gary's doing a little bit of Tarantino style. You know, here I am with a nice chronological order of this happened, Trump did these calls, and then there was this presser, and then Hegseth had one thing. Gary's just like, let's just get straight to the end and be a little bit artistic, and we'll bounce around. And that was, you know, we'll start with that, and then we'll go back to what was said the day before. But, you know, whatever
Did you
works,
say
I suppose.
artistic or autistic?
I think it's...
I don't know if you said
artistic. I meant to say artistic anyway, but you know, it's all up for interpretation, I suppose. That's part of art, really.
Indeed it is.
Someone's asking, not so much. A little bit too heavy for me, Parkway Drive. But yeah, good on him. Good old Australian metal or whatever. Not my personal taste. Anyway, let's get back to the Zelensky call, you know. Yeah, well, I appreciate it. You know, I appreciate the bants. I'm all here for it. I have a good time. So, yeah, time to look at. So, you know, we had going back Tarantino style, a bit of editing. So Trump made the call, and you know, he had that True Social that I just played, and then he said, "I'm going to call Zelensky," and then he did, and then he did this one. I just spoke to President Volodymyr, however you pronounce that name, Zelensky of Ukraine, because I think that's even comes into the politics of Russia versus Ukraine, because basically Putin and Zelensky have the same first name, but got the Russian and Ukraine spelling, I think. Both sort of a Vladimir, but a Volodymyr. Anyway, the conversation went very well. He, like President Putin, wants to make peace. We discussed a variety of topics having to do with the war, but mostly the meeting that is being set up on Friday in Munich, where Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will lead the delegation. I'm hopeful that the results of that meeting will be positive. It is time to stop this ridiculous war, where there has been massive and totally unnecessary death and destruction. God bless the people of Russia and Ukraine. This is just diplomacy beautifully. He's not sort of, insulting either side, really. And he's sort of setting it up probably the way it should be set up. And then soon after that, we had a bit of a press conference.
Jerry Grimes says, well, we don't have to worry about NATO. Dirty Don made sure of that. We're on our own now. I'll fill in the words for you, Sherry. No help if we need it. Well, first of all, NATO is 99.99% the military might of the U.S. government, Sherry. So, first of all, we don't need them. Secondly, that's not true. None of this is true. But, that's okay. We're going to make NATO great again, just like President Trump, Donald J. Trump, is making America great again. But I'm glad you joined us, Sherry. We always encourage differing opinions on this show, no matter what. Don't you ever black me out again, Chris. I'll punch you in your Australian aluminium face.
Sorry, what was that? Did you saying something? I did mean to do this, okay? So just, don't take it personally. I tried to cue it up, even muted, possibly. So you could keep talking with whatever you were saying, and I could get ready for, this press conference. So this was yesterday. There's a bit of stuff on Ukraine. There's a few other things which we may as well cover while we're here. Because, it has to be kind of related, I suppose, because there was a deal with Russia and America, some kind of prisoner swap. There was this teacher, Mark Fogel. I think he got done for drugs or something.
Yeah.
He was sentenced to 14 years, and Trump's got him back. So I think she mentions it here somewhere. Hang on.
You got no sound.
J.D. Vance.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Oh, God.
Yesterday, in particular, was a truly special day for the United States of America. Thanks to the great leadership of President Trump and the strong and tough leadership of President Trump, Mark Fogel, an American teacher detained by Russia, was returned to American soil and met with the president here at the White House last night. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the rest of President Trump's incredible national security team helped to negotiate the exchange that secured Mark Fogel's release. This event shows a good faith effort from Russia, and it's a sign, as I just said, that we are moving in the right direction to end this brutal war. Malphine Fogel, Mark's 95-year-old mother, was understandably very worried that she would never see her son again after his arrest in 2021. Mrs. Fogel was actually slated to join President Trump on stage at the July 13th Butler, Pennsylvania rally to speak out for Mark. And then the infamous assassination attempt against President Trump took place.
Just briefly on that one, because they had the speakers before Trump and then Trump got on stage. Is that true? I mean, was she slated to speak after Trump spoke? I'm not sure if that's If that makes a lot of sense.
I thought she said she spoke with him. I don't think she was. She said she was slated to speak.
Isn't that? Hang on. I think you might be wrong, so I have to take this opportunity to hammer that point home.
On stage after his arrest in 2021. Mrs. Fogel was actually slated to join President Trump on stage at the July 13th Butler, Pennsylvania rally to speak out for Mark.
Okay. All right. Look, I'll give you that one. All right. Here I was getting a bit cocky thinking, all right, I got Gary. I heard the word slated, but I ignored the word on stage with Trump.
Yeah.
And then the infamous assassination.
Anyway, that's sort of a bit of goodwill to sort of get everything going. And then we've sort of got a bit more on, a question about whether Russia is an adversary. She was asked.
Visit to Russia or any in-person meeting at this time. John.
Caroline, two questions, one on foreign policy, one on domestic policy. Following up on the president's call that he had with President Putin, does the president view Russia, does he view President Putin as an ally, as a partner, as a competitor, or as an adversary?
I believe this nation views Putin and Russia as a great competitor in the region, at times an adversary, but as the president has said as well, he enjoys having good diplomatic relationships with leaders around the world, finding that common ground, also calling them out when they are wrong, and leading from a position of peace through strength. That's the president's greatest strength, and we've seen that again, time and time again.
I think the next question is about McConnell, which isn't super relevant. We might as well play it all
in your statement regarding the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard, there was one Republican who voted against the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard. It was Senator Mitch McConnell. Similarly, how does the administration view Senator McConnell? Can he be a partner in the president's legislative agenda? Are you disappointed that he voted against not only Tulsi Gabbard, but also Pete Hegseth to be the defense secretary?
I think we're greatly disappointed in any Republican who chooses willfully to vote against the president's exceptionally qualified cabinet nominees and picks to lead his America First administration. Not a single Democrat swayed from voting against President Biden's nominees, and we know how many of them turned out. They turned out to be atrocious at their jobs, leaving America much worse than they were when they took the oath of office. And so I've said it repeatedly from this podium. I addressed it at the beginning of my remarks. We expect all Republicans to vote, to stay tough and strong, vote for President Trump's nominees so we can get to work and continue to work very hard to implement this president's agenda. Sure.
Yeah, I agree with this comment here from Bad Blood Gaming and the one before. It is hilarious, the European reaction, and we will come to that sort of later. They're all upset about being left out. I think even Viktor Orban from Hungary basically even sort of said, Europe haven't earned a seat at the table. So we'll come to a bit of that as well.
Later on that press conference with Pete Hegseth, he was asked that very question, like, aren't they, why isn't Europe being, asked to the table? And he did a diplomatic dance around that. But this is exactly right. Like, they haven't done shit for the last couple of years. All they've done is instigated a war. And, you don't deserve a seat at any table regarding peace between Russia and Ukraine. I 100% agree with this.
And just before we jump on the next presser, there was a comment about Jordan. We won't get back there, but just a quick little mention about the meeting, because we had a big conversation yesterday. We didn't actually show any of the presser with the King of Jordan and Trump, but apparently it went pretty well. But basically, Trump wanted Egypt and Jordan to take all the refugees, and Jordan basically said, oh, we'll take 2,000 of them, which is, not a little bit short of the 2 million, but
before I leave you all today, the president wanted me to share with all of you that he had a wonderful meeting with King Abdullah of Jordan yesterday. They discussed many things, including the Gaza Strip and its future at great length. The king would much prefer that the Palestinians stay in place, with the additional land to be used for new development, which would greatly create jobs at levels never seen before. But the president feels it would be much better and more majestic if these Palestinians could be moved to safer areas. I would just add to that the president remains wholeheartedly committed to seeing peace in the Middle East, and our Arab partners in the region have been tasked with coming up with a peace plan to present to the president. That is ongoing. King Abdullah mentioned that yesterday. He also committed to accepting 2,000 sick children from the Gaza Strip, which the president called a beautiful gesture. So the administration continues to work with our Arab partners in the region region. We stand closely with our ally Israel, and the president has presented this big, new, bold idea to secure peace in the Middle East, and he is not going to waver from that. And we look forward to seeing that goal of this administration achieved as well. Thank you very much, everybody.
So I found that kind of reassuring. Hopefully this is more Trump out of the deal. You know, she said something about he has put it to the Arab leaders to come up with some kind of proposal. Hopefully he's just, you know, trying to get something going by coming up with this outrageous thing.
And I think the original, you know, thing where he was saying, hey, we're just going to move all the Gazans out and we're going to turn this into, you know, vacation areas. And I think that was like, hey, here's my proposal. Here's the opportunity for you guys to come up with another one. Real quick, Black Dog, I believe the Nord Stream demolition was 100% an American operation. I do not think that we had any other European. Number one, I question their. I don't even know if they'd be willing to do that. I think that was a black operation done by the Biden administration, 100%. And I don't think it was even in Germany's interest to do that, nor any other European nation to do that. So I do think that the only thing that makes sense is that was between the type of operation that would have taken to do that demolition, and on top of that, I don't think Germany would agree to that. That's just not the way they do things typically.
There was a pretty good article by that Seymour Hersh. He's an old school journalist, I think going back to Vietnam days. He does some good stuff. He also did some good stuff on this so-called Assad chemical weapons attack in Syria, which may well have been by the rebels, sort of connected to the government in power now. But Seymour Hersh did a big article about the Nord Stream, who did it. I think he was saying it was, mainly America, but there was some possibly collaboration with another European country. I forget which one it was. But I'm not really sure. But yeah, it was mostly, if not completely, an American thing. You know, they didn't want the Russian gas to go to Europe. They want American gas to go to Europe.
100%. And why would we even need to involve any other country for that? We have the assets, we have the capabilities, and like all you're doing by involving another nation is creating a possibility to leak that operation. So I don't even think that would make sense. It doesn't make operational security sense.
Yeah, could be. I don't know exactly, but it's worth, because the articles was pretty good. It seemed to have some kind of research, and he's generally pretty good with sources and stuff. But yeah, I suppose it makes sense that America could do it all on their own very easily. You guys are quite capable of such ecological terrorism on such a massive scale. You don't need any help to pull that off, you know. But yeah, soon after, around the same time, I forget the exact, it's hard to work out time zones or whatever, but around the same time as these phone calls, Hegseth's sort of over there with some NATO meetings. And the first few minutes of this, I think I might have even put the bobblehead up a few minutes into this speech. Honestly, it was so good.
Secretary Healy, for your leadership, both in hosting and now leading the UDCG. This is my first Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and I'm honored to join all of you today. And I appreciate the opportunity to share President Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine. We are at, as you said, Mr. Secretary, a critical moment. As the war approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end.
I love this focus of the war must stop. Like Trump has sort of asked, like, oh, but wouldn't this be giving Russia a victory, or wouldn't this be, this, that, or the other? And Trump always like, look, we just want the war to stop. We want people to stop dying. That's priority number one. Everything else is sort of secondary. I love that approach. That's how it should be. Everyone else is like, no, we'd rather, Ukrainian territorial integrity, and they got to get Crimea back for Ukraine, even though the people of Crimea don't want to be back in Ukraine. They've been part of Russia for almost a decade now. So they want these abstract ideals to take precedent over saving lives, which is just disgusting, really. So it's good that Trump's like, look, let's just stop the dying. Shouldn't that be priority number one? Not whether the border's slightly this way or that way. It's sort of contested. It's got a complex history of Russian culture and all that kind of stuff. It's like, it's not as clear cut as Ukraine's just some poor independent little country, and then some completely foreign nation has done all this. Priority is to save lives, and they seem to be focused on that, which is good.
That's what the left does. They put ideological everything above reality. I mean, that's literally the problem with everything they spew. It's all about ideology. It's all about these, woo-woo concepts that actually don't play out in reality. Just like, the idea of, universal basic income sounds great on paper. Communism sounds great on paper. Socialism sounds great on paper, but it doesn't play out the way that it once you introduce the human factor and reality into it, it goes out the window.
Yeah, that is mostly true. But with the Ukraine stuff and some other stuff, you do get a lot of Republicans as well that were sort of doing the same kind of line of like,
that's because Republicans are communists and socialists too. I mean, they're look, that is the problem that we have had for the last 20 years is that our Republicans are Democrats light. Like they're like, the only difference between them is some of them might support, like there are one or two issues that keep them from becoming, Democrats and socialists and just outright communists. Is they have one or two issues where they're like, free trade but communism, or, I like guns, or, I'm in a district that I know there's certain things I have to say in public, but then I do something completely differently behind closed doors of what I'm voting for. And that's the problem that we've run into. But no, you're right. I mean, that's been our entire issue as America for the last 20 years is like we've had one party in power, and that is the Screw America Party.
Yeah, but hopefully things are changing.
President Trump has been clear with the American people and with many of your leaders that stopping the fighting and reaching an enduring peace is a top priority. He intends to end this war by diplomacy and bringing both Russia and Ukraine to the table. And the U.S. Department of Defense will help achieve this goal. We will only end this devastating war and establish a durable peace by coupling allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective.
Makes so much sense. This is what you need. You need realism. But this comment here, as well as the one about, he mentions NATO and Ukraine probably not joining, they're the two comments that people are freaking out about. But he's just pre-2014 borders, that includes Crimea. As I said, it's been Russia ever since then, and nothing really happening in Crimea. Obviously, in the rest of Ukraine, there's been a civil war, and Russia funding the separatists and all that kind of stuff. But in Crimea, it was annexed by Russia in 2014, and it's basically been peaceful ever since.
Yeah,
they were sort of spared by that. They're happy there, and this idea that Ukraine must get, take Crimea back by force against the Crimeans' will. He's just saying, look, that's not possible, and not just Crimea, but probably Donetsk and Lugansk, which did have referendums in 2014. Russia didn't even acknowledge them, but they also voted to break away from Ukraine after the what many people call a coup, and I think fair enough. So this is it's just realistic that we're not going back to those pre-2014 borders, and people are upset about it. And even if they're saying, even if it is unrealistic, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't just go out and say that because that's like,
we're gonna sit here and pretend and freaking, just placate one another. I mean, that's the thing. It's just been all political theater, and that's why nothing gets done. And the UN is the worst at it. It's like take all the worst of every country's political theater jackasses, put them into one place. We'll call it the UN, and we'll just sit around and freaking circle jerk each other about the good idea fairy that nothing gets done, and that's the problem. And Bucephalus, I guess is how you say it. This is exactly right. There's never been a military solution to the war in Ukraine, including Ukraine versus Russia. It's like ultimately Ukraine is going to run out of resources. Ultimately, the only other option would be to put American troops ultimately on the border with them, and that's not going to happen. If the Biden administration thought they could get away with it, they would have done it. I 100% believe that. But there has never been a military solution to the war in Ukraine, and there never will be. Unless we want.
Straight away, you could tell it's going to be a war of attrition. Russia's bigger. They got more material. They got more people. It's just a matter of time, even if it grinds. And Russia seems to have the time. I think they've been preparing for this for many years to have a long, slow, sort of drawn-out war, which eventually they will win, unless America comes in for World War III, which
and they don't care.
Shouldn't be on the cards.
They'll throw, to them, every soldier they put out there is like a freaking bullet. It's completely expendable. Like, they don't care about the numbers. Yeah. They got
Lindsey Graham
population.
Yeah, like Lindsey Graham said, the money we're spending on Ukraine, that's the best value we could get for our money because we're sticking it to the Russians. It's like all these people are dying. Ukraine aren't going to win, but at least you can sort of stick it to the Russians and kill a few of them and drain their economy. It's great. It's a good thing. Like, it's craziness.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll get back to the good stuff. I might back that up and hear that little sentence.
Start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering.
Exactly.
A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops.
So this one, another thing that's making people lose their minds, that like basically Ukraine shouldn't be in NATO, because if they join NATO with Article 5, if Russia attacks Ukraine or there's any kind of conflict there, then America's supposedly obligated to go and fight. So that's obviously not in America's interest, or any of European interest really, to sign up for that. But he's saying, look, Ukraine needs some kind of security guarantee, so we can work out something like that. But I think he says we'll use European soldiers and we'll do this and we'll make sure Article 5 isn't triggered. And it's makes sense to me, what he's saying here.
If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine. To further enable effective diplomacy and drive down energy prices that fund the Russian war machine, President Trump is unleashing American energy production and encouraging other nations to do the same. Lower energy prices, coupled with more effective enforcement of energy sanctions, will help bring Russia to the table. Safeguarding European security must be an imperative for European members of NATO. As part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Members of this contact group must meet the moment. This means donating more ammunition and equipment, leveraging comparative advantages, expanding your defense industrial base, and importantly, leveling with your citizens about the threat facing Europe. Part of this is speaking frankly with your people about how this threat can only be met by spending more on defense. 2% is not enough. President Trump has called for 5%. And I agree. Increasing your commitment to your own security is a down payment for the future. A down payment, as you said, Mr. Secretary, of peace through strength.
He continues on that line for a while. We'll probably come back to similar thoughts in the later presser about, Europe contributing more, and basically he basically says America can't focus on Europe's security. He's going to focus more on sort of China and America's security, threat of China and America's security. So America's basically going to step back a little bit from Europe, and Europe need to step up. And, fair enough. I still think this idea, like we even have it it's a common thing, like, Putin wants to sort of reclaim the Soviet Union and all the territory that he lost. This is a common belief, and I sort of understand where it comes from, because he has said some comments. I'm trying to find some other comment here. There are a few comments like that. That he doesn't just want Ukraine; he wants to reclaim all of the Soviet empire. I don't think this is true. I think if you look at how tough this is in Ukraine and what a sort of a very particular case Ukraine is, with a special history of that country in particular, I don't think it's not a general empire rebuilding, reclaiming thing, in my opinion. And the thought that if somehow after all this fighting, just to get a little piece of eastern Ukraine is over, he's then going to move on to Poland. He's then going to move on to other countries. I mean, I don't think it's realistic. I think just because Putin has said...
I don't buy that argument either. I really don't. And the other part of that, the problem with that argument is he probably wouldn't be likely to even want to do that had we stuck by the many different agreements that we've made with Russia by not, putting NATO closer and closer to the Russian border. Like we have been provoking Russia for a really, really long time, and for us to provoke them and put more and more missile defense systems, more and more things go closer and closer to the Russian border, all of which including more people in the UN, all of which we agreed not to do, and then for them suddenly take over Crimea, take over Georgia, and then say, oh God, now they're going for Poland. I think that's a little bit of a red herring. Like we got to stick to the agreements before we can start calling out Russia on any of their encroachment on neighboring borders.
Yeah, and I know Wikipedia shouldn't be a great source or whatever, but like this is generally pretty accurate. You can look up this stuff. I remember watching this at the time, just before the Russian invasion in 22. I might as well just read this actually. On 17th of December 21, during the prelude to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russia published a list of demands to the West for security guarantees in the form of 2 draft treaties with NATO and the United States. The proposals included a ban on Ukraine and other ex-Soviet countries from joining NATO, and a rollback in deployments of NATO troops and weapons in Central and Eastern Europe. Russia had long been concerned with the decline in its self-regarded sphere of influence in the former Soviet republics, which were aligning themselves with the West economically and politically, although they were obstinately dissatisfied with the existing security architecture and NATO expansion. The demands, issued during a period of high tensions, during which about 100,000 Russian troops were massed on Ukraine's borders, were widely seen as an ultimatum, an attempt by Russia to exert pressure and influence on Western countries. Basically, in hindsight, at least, I mean, it was obvious at the time, you should just say, yeah, we don't really want Ukraine and NATO and some of these other countries. We can just agree with that. And there's a chance, we can't say for sure, that the war might not have happened. Because what was the response? The main demands were rejected by NATO and the United States on the 26th of January. The Russian invasion followed 1 month later on the 24th of February. So we can't ignore that part of it.
And it's a huge FU to all the agreements that we've had with Russia in the past. The things that have stabilized peace between these two nuclear superpowers, is the agreements that we put into place. And then we're constantly telling Russia, FU, we're going to do what we want, no matter what. One thing I do want to do...
Walking out of missile treaties as well. We had, I forget the exact, certain type of missile agreements. And America walked back. I think Trump even walked back on one of them, which wasn't his finest moment. But, Biden and every administration sort of made things a little bit rough.
Oh, 100%. I do want to just kind of point out the fact when we're talking about the percentage of GDP that we're spending on defense compared to some of these other countries, the UK is 2.3. All right, our 3.4% is $905 billion. The UK's 2.3% is 69 billion. Germany, 1.5%, completely protected by us, is $63 billion. Ukraine, to their benefit, is spending 37% of their GDP. France is at 2.1 or 49 billion. Japan is 1.2. They're not really talking about them, but that's another thing that we should really start. I think we should start backing off and let Japan. I think they've earned the right to kind of start developing their own military outside of the Japanese Defense Force. They have some major, if they were able to develop more military might and spend their own money on some of their own defense, we'd have less to worry about with South Korea, or North Korea rather. You always got to worry about the South Koreans too. You got to watch out for those, just like Australians. Look at Australia. This is a joke almost. 1.9% of your GDP, and then you're selling all your freaking aluminium. This shouldn't even happen. Australia, that's $34 billion. I bet you guys sell more aluminium to us than $34 billion worth. You could be paying that off just with the aluminium you sold us.
Yeah, but we're pretty safe over here, you know. We don't need to throw too much into the military. We're like peaceful people. We get along with people. We're sort of tucked away. We're a nice little island. So we spend less, okay? That's just how it works. Makes sense to me. But anyway, back to, I saw most of that one. Then after that we had Trump. Trump had a bit of a press conference. And I have some timestamps. Hang on, got to bring us up to it. All right. Yes, he starts talking about Ukraine.
It'd be a very numbers of mostly soldiers. The cities and towns have been largely demolished. It's a shame what's happened to that country. It would have never happened if I were president. That I can tell you. Would have never happened. It's to look at that. And October 7th would have never happened either, by the way, Middle East. But we'll get it. I think we'll get it. We'll get something done. We're going to be meeting. Actually, tomorrow they're meeting in Munich, as you know, and we're going to have some other meetings. And I'll be dealing with President Putin largely on the phone, and we ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect that he'll come here, and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster. It's a really bloody, horrible war.
Did you Saudi Arabia, the first meeting will happen?
I think so. We think we're going to probably meet in Saudi Arabia, the first meeting. Hasn't been set, but not too distant future.
Did you also be part of that meeting?
We both understand, you know, we know the Crown Prince, and I think it'd be a very good place to meet.
So it sounds like that would just be a meeting between you and Putin and perhaps the Crown Prince, but not President Zelensky?
Probably we'll have a first meeting, and then we'll see what we can do about the second meeting.
Another thing that's kind of funny and annoying a lot of people, doing some kind of deal just with Putin, because, you know, Ukraine really has no leverage. They got to sort of deal with the cards they're dealt. They didn't really have too much power to it. You know, Trump called Putin first, and then he said, I'm going to call Zelensky and inform him of the call I've just had with Putin. Yeah. I think I've got a clip later. Zelensky's sort of complaining about Putin being called first or whatever. He said it was unpleasant.
Like, they're dealing with us. They're dealing with, like, Dad. Like, hey, you know, he's calling up Putin. He's like, hey, look, you've been bullying our kids. I'm going to need you to stop now, okay? Because now we're just going to. And then you just call the kid up like, hey, look, if you don't just stop this nonsense, I'm going to have to pull all your funding, okay? And so you're going to do whatever we tell you to do, because they don't have a military without the military supplies that we're providing them. So it's just like, let's quit pretending you're in charge of anything, Zelensky, because you're not.
Yeah.
Not even real.
Commit to go to Ukraine?
What about Ukraine?
Did you commit to go to Ukraine as well?
No, I haven't. I haven't committed to
Would
go
you
to
go?
Ukraine. I would think about going. Yeah, I'd think about it. No problem.
You say today, Mr. President, that they received your vision. What is your plan to end this war?
I think she said, Ukraine says they have received your vision. What is your plan?
Like today, Secretary.
Well, I'm not going to tell you my plan. I can just tell you we've made a lot of progress. This should have been done by Biden, not by me, because this has been going on for now a long time, years. And it should have been done by Biden. Just like the young gentleman that I brought home yesterday after 2 weeks. We worked on it for 2 weeks. He was a fine man, and he was in there for 3.5, almost 4 years, and they weren't able to do a thing, and I got him out. And as you know, I didn't pay $6 billion. I didn't pay anything. We did a trade, and we did a good job. We got him out in 2 weeks.
I think America been out released years some ago. Crypto hacker.
Really should have been out
not a big terrorist. Like what did Biden do? That swap with that basketball player for like the arms, the merchant of death, the Russian, arms smuggler. Yeah. Biden released him to get back that basketball chick that got done for marijuana or something, which is kind of a crazy deal. So this is a bit better, I think.
Stupid deal.
I don't think it's practical to have it, personally.
That comment there's a bit coming up where Trump basically says, I think he has to hold some elections sometime soon. It's just a little bit of shade at Zelensky. He mentions that his poll numbers are down, and he basically says, well, by the way, he probably should have an election sometime soon, because he's basically been saying, well, we've got the war, so we can't have any elections. I'm just going to hang on to power. I guess, until the war's over. But even Trump says, yeah, you should probably have some elections soon. You know?
I know that our new Secretary of Defense, who's excellent, Pete, made a statement today saying that he thinks it's unlikely or impractical. I think probably that's true. I think long before President Putin, they said there's no way they'd allow that. This has been going on for many, many years. They've been saying that for a long time, that Ukraine cannot go into NATO. And I'm okay with that. I just want the war, whether they are or they're not. But it certainly would seem to be that most people have said that is something that's not going to happen.
Just got to pause on that for a sec, because another great comment that people are losing their minds over. You know, like, yeah, it's not looking realistic that Ukraine's going to join NATO, and he can almost understand why Russia would not want that. You know, like, you guys wouldn't want Mexico to join some sort of military alliance with Russia or China or Iran or something like that. You would have a say in some alliance right on your border, just like Russia would with a sphere of influence. And people don't like this idea of big powers having a sphere of influence, but that's sort of just realpolitik. That's sort of how it works. And yeah, and you hear this idea of like, oh, well, you know, Ukraine should be free to decide whether it joins NATO or not. No, it's up to NATO to decide who they accept, and it's not in their interest to accept Ukraine.
Wow.
So.
Are you freezing out President Zelensky of this process a bit? Isn't there a danger of that?
No, I don't think so, as long as he's there. But, you know, at some point you're going to have elections, too. You're going to have to have an election.
At some point he's going to have some elections. That's a little bit of a
Security assurances, Mr. President. What does that look like?
In terms of what?
Security
assurances. If the war were
assurances?
to end, he says he wants
For Ukraine.
guarantees of security.
We'll see what that means. I think when the war ends, one thing he was very strong about, if it ends, he wants it to end. And that's President Putin said that. He wants it to end. He doesn't want to end it and then go back to fighting 6 months later. We talked about the possibility, I mentioned it, of a ceasefire so we can stop the killing. And I think we'll probably end up at some point getting a ceasefire in the not too distant future.
I think just before sort of these events, Zelensky was saying he wouldn't even agree to negotiate until he was given some kind of security guarantee beforehand, which is like, yeah, good luck with that, Zelensky. Good luck. I don't think it's happening.
Do you expect Ukraine?
Say it, what?
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
Why did you decide to provide support to Ukraine? Would you support Zelensky ceding territory or exchanging territory in any agreement to end the war?
Well, he's going to have to do what he has to do, but, you know, his poll numbers aren't particularly great, to put it mildly. He's got a country where, you know, it's been savaged and attacked. And he's got an army that's been very, very brave, actually, despite the fact that, you know, we've given him, in my opinion, $350 billion. That's what the real number is. You don't hear that number. And Europe has given, in my opinion, $100 billion. And they've done it in the form of a loan. And I have a Secretary of Treasury right now who's actually quite brave. He's over in Ukraine on a train. And there's a lot of things happening around that train that aren't so good. And he's going there to get a document done where we're going to be assured that we're going to, in some form, get this money back, because we're putting...
Oh, I was hoping you can still hear Trump. But basically, yeah, this meeting of the Treasury secretaries, they're talking to Zelensky. I think it's, to do some kind of deal with, if we're going to keep funding you, we're going to get something back from your resources or whatever. So I think that's what Trump's referring to there.
Than we are. We have an ocean in between. Europe has nothing in between. You know what they have in between? They have Ukraine in between. So wait a minute. So
see, we got an ocean too in Australia with less funding. Trump's making the point too. You got the ocean, you pay less. That's just how it works. You know?
So, as you know, Europe is putting up money, and they're getting it in the form of a loan. And the United States under Biden didn't do loans. They just handed money every time somebody walked in from Ukraine. They just handed them money foolishly. This should have never happened. It should have never started. And once it did, other things should have happened. Other things should have taken place. So we're getting security on our money. We're going to have it secured by, they have rare earth, and they have oil and gas, and they have a lot of other things. And we're asking for security on our money.
How long does Zelensky have?
They've agreed to it. Ukraine has agreed to it.
Does that mean you are not sending any more aid to Ukraine?
No, we are, but we want it secured, and the money is going to be secured.
When would the U.S. stop sending funding? When would the U.S. stop sending funding?
Because if we didn't do that, then Putin would say he won. We're the thing that's holding it back. And
see, I like this. See, some things like, because I'd like to say, well, just stop funding Ukraine altogether, and maybe be even more sort of like just telling direct to Ukraine, you can't win, just basically surrender. But he has to do a bit of, that's a bad look. So he has to sort of play the game a little bit.
Diplomacy.
Yeah, doing it pretty well. So I think a little bit later on, a little bit more coming up.
Here's the thing. What would Ukraine do if suddenly the U.S. said, hey, we're cutting you off? Like, what would their options be? Their options would be to surrender. So we can't fund this thing indefinitely. Like, their only option, they would surrender. They would surrender completely. Instead, like, hey, you know what, Zelensky, we're going to pretend you have a little control, and we can mitigate the damage of tens of thousands of more people, Ukrainian people being killed, and say, hey, you know what? We're going to continue to fund you, but you guys got to come to the table, and you got to end this now. Or, because it may be behind closed doors, this is the ultimatum that Trump has given them. Like, hey, if you're just going to continue this nonsense and throw your people at this, then you know what? That's fine, but we're going to pull all military and monetary support from you. And if you want to continue to do that, you get after it, buddy. Like, and I don't understand how it's not in America's interest to do that at this point. Like why it is not in America's interest whatsoever. Let's say Russia illegally completely takes over Ukraine. At the end of the day, like, it doesn't do anything for it. It doesn't matter. It's not right. It's illegal. And then if he continues to encroach on UN countries, then we can start talking about other things. But they're not part of the UN agreement. And that's the whole point of this. And if we hadn't been threatening to make them part of the UN, we wouldn't be in this situation. NATO, yeah, NATO. Like, we wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. So, that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's funny because in response to these kind of comments, and we'll show a little bit of it later, a lot of European ministers and stuff, they start talking about, well, Europe has to step up. If America backs out, we'll keep funding Ukraine, and Europe will fund Ukraine to win the war. But without the majority US funding, I mean, even with all that US funding, it's still not working for Ukraine. And eventually Ukraine will completely lose the war or be forced to come to some kind of deal anyway, even with US funding. Take that US funding out, it'll just happen even quicker, even if they want to pretend, oh, Europe will step up, but we'll play a bit of that a little bit later.
Hold on. Mike, I think we did. Like, and Chris just played that earlier. Like, Putin gave the ultimatum. He showed that earlier, prior to them invading. And then we had Victoria Nuland. Then we sent over our crazy ass vice president who lost this election, and Biden were both saying, hey, we want to make them part of NATO. Like, that was a clear provocation, and that is what predicated the invasion into Ukraine. I think that is a clear cut. We might be able to disagree on whether or not that justified it, but I think that was clearly the point. I don't know what else to say. And again, we can sit here and we can look. Russia is no friend of ours. But the other part of this is we've been no friend to Russia, and America, the United States, has backed out on almost every single agreement we've had in place with Russia. That is a fact. We have screwed them over time and time again. We've come to the table, we've come to agreements, and then like 5 years later, we walk back those agreements, we start encroaching and going past those agreements and spreading NATO left and right. Like, we've done this many, many times. And like, I don't know, if Russia was moving missiles and things like that to the Canadian border, we would respond militarily. It's almost a guarantee. And I don't I don't know how this can be seen any other way. And if I'm missing something, I'm open to that discussion and someone enlightening me a little bit. But the fact of the matter is that the United States has been a provocateur in this entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the events of 2014 are a big, massive part of it. Because even then, it sort of started with Viktor Yanukovych, the old Ukrainian leader. He was sort of saying he was going to join some kind of association agreement with the EU. And he sort of changed his mind. Russia offered him a better deal, basically. This is my reading of it. Other people see it differently. Like Putin basically strong-armed him to not accept that, but by offering basically a better customs deal. Like Ukrainian manufacturing was designed to sell to Russia, and the EU had all these sort of, I can't remember all the details, but there are various reasons why it wasn't great to sign that deal. And in that deal, most importantly, there were terms of sort of like some kind of a security agreement that what did really seem like a stepping stone into NATO. So even back then, because people try and say, oh, it's a red herring, and oh, there was never any risk of Ukraine being in NATO. In 2008, the NATO summit did say Ukraine and Georgia will be in NATO. Russia sort of got a bit worked up back then. And, it's sort of, because Germany and France knew that was a bad idea, they sort of pushed back a little bit. But then when it comes to 2014, you got basically a US-led coup. They replaced the old sort of, they call him Yanukovych pro-Russian, but he was more of a centrist. He did want to reach more to Europe. But they replaced him with a very anti-Russian government that was pushing straight away to sign that agreement that would have sort of, drawn Ukraine into the NATO orbit. And, and then there was people in that didn't agree with that. The people in the East, they didn't recognize the new government. They were taken to the streets. They were demanding a referendum for independence because they didn't recognize this new anti-Russian government. Straight away, as soon as the new government came in, they tried to pass a law restricting the Russian language. It didn't pass, but it was a sign to the east of the country, this is what's happening. And Russia, for their own reasons, if Ukraine is in conflict, if they have territorial issues, that's one of the requirements to be in NATO. You can't have territorial disputes. And I think that's why Georgia in 2008, after it was said Ukraine and Georgia would join, Georgia moved in on their sort of separatist regions that had been there since the fall of the Soviet Union in South Ossetia and I forget the name of the other one. He was trying to wrap that up, but Russia basically pushed them back. But yeah, so Russia basically, they did fund these protests and they did have some separatists helping in that civil war. But Ukraine was bombing their own people for a long time. And, technically just before they invaded, the so-called Lugansk and Donetsk republics, which they did have a referendum, it wasn't, maybe it wasn't fully credible, but they did vote for independence. Anyway, Russia didn't recognize it. See, as expansionist as they say Russia is, these regions were begging them to take them in, and Russia didn't want them. And it was only 8 years later that they...
Huge push by the United States government to put Ukraine into NATO. Like, that's a fact. And here's... Kamala Harris went to Ukraine. She talked about it on the stage. She tweeted about it later on. So, I don't know what else to say. And again, that was a red line for Russia. We can debate on whether or not that should be a red line, but we were told by the Russians, hey, if you freaking put Ukraine into NATO, there's going to be problems. So I don't know.
There was that cable. I think I've got it actually. There was a cable released by WikiLeaks. I've got it here.
Here's March 14, 2022, where she's talking about it again in Georgia. So,
but Russia's just being paranoid. Ukraine, they were never going to get in NATO. Well, then why are they so upset about them taking it off the table? Why do they have all these sort of commitments?
Exactly.
It obviously was a plan. And Russia, whether they're being paranoid or not, you understand where they're coming from. Particularly when they were invaded through Ukraine multiple times from Napoleon, from Hitler. That's a very sensitive spot. I mean, how many people did they lose? Like 30 million people they lost in World War II from an invasion through Ukraine. And, some people in the new government were sort of extremist Nazis. They are a minority. But, a lot of people at the forefront of the so-called revolution / coup were violent sort of neo-Nazis that did worship Ukrainian Nazi collaborators from the war. You know, because Ukraine was split. You did have a lot of people fighting for the Nazis, a lot of people fighting for the Soviets. You know, there's a lot of background there.
Look, and here's the underlying issue too. As much as Russia is not our friend, Ukraine is not our friend either. Like they're not, like our interests are not aligned in many different things from a cultural standpoint, for many different things. Like we don't have a vested interest in Ukraine. We shouldn't have a vested interest in Ukraine. You can make a better argument in my mind for the wars we had in the Middle East than you can for a war in Ukraine versus Russia, supporting that. Like I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want my tax dollars go into that. And clearly the American people don't want it either. That's one of the big things that Trump ran on. That's one of the big things that people were sick of the Biden administration sending billions of dollars over there, laundering money left and right, hiding money, underestimating the amount and under reporting the amount that we were actually sending to Ukraine. Like it's nuts. America doesn't want anything to do with this. And we need to stop funding it. We have too many problems here. We have billions of dollars that we should be spending in the Carolinas, now in California. We should be taking care of our Americans first, get down the deficit from, and the debt from where we're at, 34 to 36 trillion, whatever it is. Like, it's insane that we'd send money to anybody.
Yeah, and America did know that this was a provocation because this was a cable released by WikiLeaks from Ambassador William Burns back, I think, in 2008, or soon after that summit, where NATO foolishly said Ukraine will be in NATO. Yeah, eventually they got to fix a bunch of things, including corruption, by the way. They all recognize how corrupt Ukraine was, and they're like, if you do all these reforms and get rid of all the corruption and do all these other things, you will get into NATO, even though that's a problem. And they knew it was a problem from this cable here. So this was Burns reporting back to, the American government somewhere, following a muted first reaction to Ukraine's intent to seek a NATO membership action plan at the Bucharest summit, which is what I was referring to, Ukraine will be in NATO. Foreign Minister Lavrov and other senior officials have reiterated strong opposition, stressing that Russia would view further eastward expansion as a potential military threat. NATO enlargement, particularly to Ukraine, remains an emotional and neurologic, what is even that word? Neurologic issue for Russia. But strategic policy considerations also underlie strong opposition to NATO membership for Ukraine and Georgia. In Ukraine, these include fears that the issue could potentially split the country in two, leading to violence or even, some claim, civil war, which would force Russia to decide whether to intervene. Additionally, the GOR and experts continue to claim that Ukrainian NATO membership would have a major impact on Russia's defense industry, blah, 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 blah. But like it's almost like America knew 2008 how this could blow up into a war. It's almost like they decided, let's do that. Let's do this thing that would probably provoke a war on Russia's border because they're an adversary, and that's a way to sort of limit them as a rising power. And this is just a completely foolish policy, which has led to where we're at.
I haven't heard one. There hasn't been a single sort of compelling argument as to why we should be sending money over there. Like not one. And first of all, this is a European problem. If anyone is going to send gobs of money and military resources to Ukraine, it should be the European nations. They get together, they do that. Like the U.S. shouldn't be doing it at all. You know what? There's a whole bunch of other people in NATO, and we shouldn't be sending 10 times the amount of everybody else. I just don't. I haven't heard one single compelling argument other than Russia's bad. We got to push them back. Okay, they're bad. Like we don't need to push them back. If they invade, like we have NATO for a reason, all right? And NATO doesn't include Ukraine. So if Russia wants to take over NATO, that's not a NATO problem. And then we as Americans and every other country need to decide whether or not we should get involved. And the juice isn't worth the squeeze. The ROI doesn't make sense. So if they invade Poland, we have a whole other issue going on. We have NATO behind it. We have agreements in place where we will defend Poland and some of these other countries, but that's not where we're at this point.
Yeah. Most of the reasons to keep supporting it is sort of abstract ideals about democracy and like you don't let as Kamala said, you don't let a big country bully a little country. It's sort of just ideals and, sort of flowery language or whatever. But let's get back to a bit more Trump. making a bit more
Just
sense.
to be clear, do you see any future in which Ukraine returns to its pre-2014 borders?
Well, I think.
Have you heard that? Yeah. Any future where Ukraine returns to the pre-2014 borders, which, is not happening.
Pete said today that that's unlikely, right? It certainly would seem to be unlikely. They took a lot of land, and they fought for that land, and they lost a lot of soldiers. But it would just seem to me, and I'm not making an opinion on it, but I've read a lot on it, and a lot of people think that that's unlikely. Some of it will come back. I think some of it will come back. Yeah, some of that land will come back.
These are both Russian.
Who are you with?
Sorry, me.
Yeah.
AFP.
You who?
AFP, Agence France Presse.
Okay.
I don't think that, we can skip the next part, but I thought that was funny. It's like, who are you? Oh, we're the French press. He's like, okay. Anyway, Ukraine 2230. I marked a few timestamps here.
The various countries that do so well. All the time, it's the same countries that are doing well. And so we have a Department of Education where people from Washington, D.C., who
he's sort of talking about shutting down the Department of Education here, then he goes on to Ukraine. But I think he made the point, I don't know, I think it's just before here, or we might even hear it. He basically said, Department of Education, you look at how America does in like the top 40 top countries, where do we sit in terms of our education results or something? I don't know exactly how they work these things out. But apparently America's at number 40. He goes, we're always at number 40, except for one category, spending per pupil. Then we're number one. We're number one, we spend the most per pupil, and we have the results where we're number 40 in the world. So obviously there's a problem with the Department of Education, and it's better to put it back to the states, which I agree with.
100%.
But yeah.
Cases don't care about the kids out in the country. They don't care about the farms and the farmer's daughter and the farmer's sons. We have a massive bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. We have buildings that are all over the city. Department of Education. I never said Department of Education's on all these buildings. By the way, nobody shows up to work because they're all working at home. Quote, working at home. They're not working at home. And a lot of them have second jobs. And that's the other thing that Elon Musk is looking at. How many of these people are getting checks, working at home, but they're not working because they have second jobs and even third jobs? You're going to find a lot of them. And those people are going to be fired because we have to make our government smaller. All right, one more question. Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead. Nice to see you.
Oh, thank you, sir. Two questions, one on Ukraine again, and then another one on the Kennedy Center. Do you think that as far as your negotiating tactics go, did Pete Hegseth take away some of your negotiating abilities with Putin by taking Ukraine's sovereign integrity off the table, by taking...
No, I haven't done that. I'm backing Ukraine. I'm backing Ukraine.
Even the way she frames it, by taking Ukrainian sovereign territorial integrity, it's all the abstract, flowery ideals,
Don't say that. I'm approving, but I do want security for our money. Europe is getting security. You know that, right? They're giving their money in the form of a loan. Nobody knows that. And why are we at 350 billion and Europe, which doesn't separate with an ocean like we do,
the ocean logic,
we have a little thing called an ocean in between. Why is it that Europe is paying 200 billion less than us to help Ukraine? Very similar size. If you add up all the European countries, it's a little bit smaller than the U.S. in terms of the economy. Why is it that they're not paying the kind of numbers that they should be paying? And then on top of it, and I've been saying this to Biden, I told Biden, I said, you ought to be asking for either a loan or some kind of a security, like their oil and gas or something for the money, because you're putting up much more.
I mean, that's what America did in World War II with England, I'm pretty sure. They didn't even help England for free, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that was negotiated. I think they even got some islands, or it was pretty rough. I think England was left paying a debt back to America for decades and decades.
I think they still owe Australia.
Yeah, but see, we've since separated from the English Empire, so hopefully all debts are void when that happens, right? Isn't that how it works?
More money than Europe.
You can hit up England for whatever money.
Europe's putting up a much smaller amount, and it's in the form of a loan. Because we have people that were incompetent in the last administration.
I think he sort of repeats himself a little bit, but it's all good stuff. But you get the gist. Next clip I got, unless you got any comments or whatever.
Real quick, this is a really good point right here. You know what? if people are so worried about Russia, but yet the greatest existential threat that we've all agreed on for the last few years, stupidly, is climate change. And we've spent billions. The United States, globally, there has billions, if not trillions, have been spent on stupid climate change initiatives that have nothing but deleterious effects on every aspect of our lives. If people are so worried about security, quit worrying about cows farting and freaking actually get out there and spend some money on, defense security. If you're worried about Russia, spend the money on that. Again, Europe has to take a much larger role in all this stuff if they're worried about this stuff. Because
I completely agree. Although I must say, I am boiling right now. You say, take that as you will. I'm just saying, I got all my fans on. I don't know what's the reason behind these things.
If you weren't generating so much heat from your Freemason background back there, you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Did you see that? Just reminded me that a video was put out by some Freemasons recently where they're trying to be hip and they're trying to break the taboos about their organization. Hang on. Basically, it's a Freemason video. They basically did some little TikTok video. Oh, I won't be able to find it.
Oh, Fraser, you're becoming the 51st state, brother. And then Australia's coming 52nd. Don't you worry about it. And then we're taking...
Look, I'm distracted looking for a video. Otherwise, I would have had a totally witty response, but I'll just let that one slide, okay?
I haven't seen one yet.
Oh, well, there's been a few. You just, you'd rather pretend that they didn't sting, but, got a couple of good jabs in over some of the episodes at least. Anyway, I got distracted. There's a Freemason video where they're trying to be all wacky and be like, look, we're cool. And anyway, if I remember, I'll come back to it. But yeah, the Freemasons are trying to rebrand their image as not being that bad or whatever. I probably shouldn't even say anything because obviously I'm just shilling for them. And that'll just increase suspicions of people or whatever. But anyway, they even showed their little checkered floors in their temple in this little video. Yeah. But anyway, where were we before I was going to go on to Bolton next, unless you had anything else before we get to our favorite
Soviet arms control days.
Oops.
My source tonight is one of the few people to see how President Trump and President Putin interact when the cameras aren't necessarily around. Ambassador John Bolton was Trump's national security advisor in his first term, and it's great to have you here, Ambassador, because you've previously said that you believe Putin sees Trump as what you described as an easy mark. You were there for their first meeting in Helsinki. What are your expectations for this one?
Well, I don't have any expectations anymore. I think we know exactly what's going to happen. President Trump has effectively surrendered to Putin before the negotiations have even begun. The positions that Defense Secretary Hegseth announced in Brussels, which I'm sure I'd be stunned if Trump didn't convey them directly to Putin in their phone call, constitute terms of a settlement that could have been written in the Kremlin. Maybe they were written in the Kremlin and got out in propaganda channels. But it's a complete reversal of the U.S. and NATO position on a number of issues. For example, up until today, the official American position was that Ukraine should be returned to full sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's
which was
gone.
Delusional.
The question of NATO membership as far back as 2008 had been that ultimately Ukraine would become a NATO member. That doesn't look like that's around anymore either. Putin is
well, that's good, and that's sort of part of the issue. He's there like, look, since 2008, that was the plan to put Ukraine into NATO. Now that's changing. Yeah, probably shouldn't have never been floated in the first place.
Yeah.
A whole series of victories today. It's hard to encompass them all, but I think one, in addition to these substantive concessions, is that he has now, it seems, exactly what he wants. Putin doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky. He wants to negotiate with Trump because he thinks he'll get more out of him, and he's absolutely right.
What's hilarious?
He has no real power.
Yeah, well, what's hilarious is all these liberal news networks were, calling Bolton a warmonger just a couple of years ago, and now they're parading him out on every single freaking segment that they can to talk about how he's right, Trump's wrong, and Trump's given up. He's now freaking friends with Putin, and he loves Putin, and he's Putin's they're basically saying he's Putin's bitch. And it's just
Even
hilarious.
didn't Kamala have someone like Dick Cheney or something on her campaign trail or something kind of crazy like that? So one of these sort of right-wing warmongers.
Dick Cheney endorsed her. They love the Cheneys now. The left loves the Cheneys now, as well as obviously they love John Bolton.
Bolton, yeah. Yeah, you see a lot of stuff of like, we disagree on some things, but they are, man, people of principle. And John McCain, they love John McCain as well now, the left, in some ways, when he's sticking up to Trump.
Because John McCain was always a leftist.
Was he?
Yes. He was.
So yeah, I see that's your framing. It's like you got reasonable people, and anyone that's sort of doing bad stuff, it's like that's just leftism.
I mean, John McCain was the rhino. Like everybody had been calling him a rhino for many, many years. I mean, he supported almost everything that the left tried to push through. He was constantly voting against the Republicans. It wasn't that he was based. He just freaking he was a leftist. He was a Democrat. He was a Republican in name only forever. I mean, that's just who he was.
But I mean, the Republican Party does have sort of a warmonger kind of side to it, which is, I mean, the Democrats obviously do, and that's sort of changed a little bit.
That's why the old Republican Party is dead, because people got sick of that. I mean, that's the truth of it. That they were all neocons, and almost all those people, except for a few that are left, Mitch McConnell, freaking Lindsey Graham, several other one of those guys that freaking are left over from, that era that need to go. And even when Trump was in power, they were behind the scenes completely undermining him. That's colluding with Democrats to do so, by the way.
Yeah. And that's one of the better things about Trump, I think, that he sort of really helped change that and fix up the Republican Party in that way.
100%.
Let's see what good old Bolton has to say.
Ukraine being NATO, borders returning to what they were pre-2014, which Hegs had said.
Yeah, she's saying, what do you think about these two comments that Ukraine wouldn't be in NATO and, they wouldn't go back to the pre-2014 borders?
Not having Ukraine be in NATO, borders returning to what they were pre-2014, which Hegs had said was off the table. If a Trump official was here tonight and they argued, well, that's just being realistic, what would you say to that?
Good question from Caleb.
I'd say that if you're going into a negotiation, you don't announce what's acceptable to you before it begins and give away positions. I tell you, I've done a lot of negotiation with the Russians.
It was never really on the
table. There's no country out there that's better at pocketing concessions that you make and then wanting more. We used to joke in Soviet arms control days about a famous Russian negotiator who used to greet the Americans every morning with a jovial, well, what have you got for me today? And
I'm not sure exactly what period he's talking about here. He said Soviet. Was there ever a time where the Soviets would just come into the Americans like, give us this, and America would give it to them, and they'd come back and say, all right, give us more? I'm not even sure what he's referring to there.
Look, I mean, what can we look back on and say that Bolton has been successful at? Like, what major impact in a positive way? What are his accomplishments? I don't know of any. I know we spent a lot more time in Iraq and Afghanistan because of him and people like him. I can't point to anything that I'm aware of that Bolton has been successful at.
That reminds me, I might jump back after this to the previous, we just showed Trump at the previous presser. Later, Tulsi Gabbard gets sworn in, and she makes a couple of comments about thanking Trump for sort of being somewhat of a peace candidate and how many military servicemen appreciate that he's not going to fight wars everywhere and put the soldiers out there at risk for stupid stuff, which was a good point.
And that's what we're hearing from Russia. This is something Putin prepared the ground for. Last week he said he agreed with Trump that in the comments Trump had made in the election that the war never would have taken place had Trump been president. So he began the flattery campaign, the release of Mark Fogel, the American hostage, part of the flattery warm-up campaign, make Trump look like the center of attention. Belarus's decision to release an American and a couple others, part of the flattery campaign.
Not to back up Bolton or whatever, but it's funny in that first Trump message that I showed where Trump's like, he also used my phrase, common sense, I agree. We both agree on common sense or whatever. So, yeah, in a way, Russia would be sort of flattering Trump in a way, but that's not what's winning him over or whatever. It's not like
all he's doing. He's literally enumerating all of Trump's successes in the 4 weeks that the 3.5 weeks that he's been in office, going through this list that couldn't have been done in the past many years. And they are genuine accomplishments the Biden administration couldn't get done in 4 years. Trump did it in 4 weeks. So, like, all you're doing is making the case for everybody against you there, freaking broom stash.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know. I've never really met, doesn't matter where people are on the political aisle. Most people, well, I suppose, except some people on the left, I suppose now, most people don't like Bolton, right? Who is his fan base?
Look, I was trying to think, and I'm trying to be as charitable as possible to Bolton. I think he was actually probably a pretty good UN ambassador. That's somebody that's cantankerous, that isn't willing to give up everything. That's probably a good spot for them in the UN. But the guy is a freaking warmonger. The guy thinks that he has a hammer. That's all he has, and he thinks everything's a nail. That's the problem with Bolton. Yep. So being at the UN as the ambassador to the UN, where he really has no war powers, is exactly the right place for him, where he just tells everybody, he like shoos them out of their office. That's what he does. Get out of my office. Like that's what he does. And you know, that's probably a good spot for him. But that was the only thing that he's ever done sort of successfully. And I have to go back through and look at his accomplishments or lack thereof as the UN ambassador to even give a you know, accurate assessment of that.
Yeah, I've got a clip that I'll play after this. Actually, you got it from OG in our group chat of Trump talking about Bolton a while ago. The benefits of Bolton, just being a crazy person in the background, might have helped with North Korea negotiations and things like that. So it's kind of funny. He has some advantage just because he's such a crazy warmonger, you know, for some sort of negotiation purposes or whatever. But the only good thing going from him is how crazy and warmongerish he is. But yeah, I think there's a couple of moments.
Trump said today also in his own readout of the call that he put out that Putin repeated back to him about using common sense to end the war. Do you think that that's part of that flattery campaign?
Right. Well, there was a tweet or whatever you call those things on Truth Social that used my very effective campaign slogan, common sense. I think we all believe in common sense, but he noticed that Putin had picked up that line. It's another stroke of flattery. I mean, you got to say, Putin hasn't forgotten his lessons as a KGB agent maneuvering an operative around. And there are broader...
At least he lasted 3 minutes before mentioning. Did you know that Putin was a KGB agent? In case you've never heard that one before. Apparently Putin was a KGB agent. Have you heard that before?
I didn't know that.
Significances than just in Ukraine. This is a palpable harm to American national security. Because what Hegseth and Trump did today was not only blow up the NATO position on Ukraine, they blew up a thing called the Belavasia Accords that Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia signed in December of 1991 that broke up the Soviet Union along the lines of the internal republics. So it means that not only is unprovoked aggression by Russia against Ukraine now okay, every other former republic in the Soviet Union is vulnerable to the same thing without any indication that the U.S. will do anything about it. And I think the people who are paying the closest attention to this outside of in Ukraine are in Beijing, where they see the United States unwilling to act against unprovoked aggression in the center of Europe. What are they thinking now about Taiwan?
If there is any chance that this works, when you look at the dynamics here, do you believe that there's a way that this could be successful, that it could end this war that has gone on for as long as it has now?
He makes her look somewhat
Well,
reasonable.
I think it'll be successful for Russia. It's a war of attrition. Russia's the bigger country. I think 3 years of mishandling by the Biden administration, dribbling out weapons assistance one system at a time after months of argument, prevented a really strategic response to the Russian invasion. So there's a lot of blame to go around here, but the surrender is going to be signed by Donald Trump.
Can I get you just before
America's not a war with
Trump
Russia. It's
swore
not a surrender.
in Tulsi Gabbard this
Of
afternoon
America.
in the Oval Office. Pam Bondi swore her in, but Trump was there, obviously, inside the Oval. How does that presence as the Director of National Intelligence by Tulsi Gabbard, do you think, shape the Trump-Putin relationship in a second Trump term?
Well, I think Putin couldn't be happier. I tell you, they're drinking vodka straight out of the bottle in the Kremlin tonight. It was a great day for Moscow. I think Tulsi Gabbard's role as Director of National Intelligence is going to be extremely harmful to our national security. I think many allies are now going to think twice before they share intelligence with us. I think it'll impair our ability to gain...
Isn't he sort of justifying America's allies like being anti-American? So if they start saying, oh, we're not going to cooperate with America, we're not going to share intelligence, Bolton's already prepping the ground as if that's somewhat justified now because he's picked Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, whatever it is.
Confidence around the world. It was one of his worst nominations, beyond a doubt.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you for your perspective tonight.
And I got to sort of follow that up. I just thought this funny thing that AG sent us. Where are we? No. So there's a while.
Don't go in. They went in. It was such a bad decision. So Bolton, see again, you get back. Bolton, a real dope. But I thought he'd be great because he was so stupid. He was like a boiler. Every time, if somebody shot down a little tiny crappy drone that cost about $15, he'd want to go to war with Russia. I said, no, I think... He was great for me, though, for a period of time because he was a nut job, and everybody... I could see his face get red with that stupid white mustache, and he'd be ready to explode. And this was good for me. I went to Kim Jong-un in North Korea. I took this moron with me, and he never said anything. But when Kim Jong-un saw him, he said, oh, shit, I think the guy wants to go to war. So he was great for me to negotiate with. The same thing with Russia. You know, when Putin saw him, I'd be very nice. I'd say, hi, Vladimir, how you doing? And then Bolton, so, 2 rows back, and he'd see that moron, and he'd say, holy shit, this guy wants to go to war with me. And I got a lot of what I wanted. We killed, as you know, the Nord Stream 2. I killed Nord Stream 2.
And, what have we got? A few more people getting mad. There's Germany getting mad.
Bedauerlich ist, und das sage ich auch.
It is regrettable. Is this on the screen? Yeah. It is regrettable, and I say this.
Hat gegenüber Putin schon
What was it? It is part of the truth
gehört zur Wahrheit dazu.
that the Trump administration has made public concessions to Putin before negotiations have even begun.
Öffentlich Zugeständnisse gemacht, bevor die Verhandlungen überhaupt begonnen haben. Aus meiner Sicht wäre
From my
es
point
besser
of view,
gewesen, über eine mögliche
it would have been better to talk about possible loss of territory of the country at a negotiating table first and not take it off the table beforehand. Missed a few words there. However, if a peace treaty between Russia and Ukraine is reached quickly, which I would very much welcome, we cannot and must not simply sit back and relax. Everyone in Europe must be fully aware of this. It is important that the killing stops quickly now, but on the basis of a truly resilient, lasting, fair and just peace. So yeah, they're not happy about Ukraine getting squeezed out. And then we've got the UK, they're not too happy either.
We've seen the calls from President Trump overnight, and we all want to see a durable peace and no return to conflict and aggression. And let's not forget, Russia remains a threat well beyond Ukraine.
See, I think that's bullshit, but that's the line.
So my message in these discussions will be that there can be no negotiation about Ukraine without Ukraine, and Ukraine's voice must be at the heart of any talks. And as I say, the Ukrainians are fighting bravely. It's our job as defense ministers here at NATO to put them in the best position to secure a lasting peace through strength. Thank you very much.
We've also got the EU sort of foreign minister. Oh, sorry.
It is clear that any deal behind our backs will not work.
On our backs.
Any agreement will need
Get over
also
yourselves.
Ukraine and Europe being part of it, and this is clear that appeasement
Who is this
also
lady?
always fails.
She's like the EU
So
foreign minister. She used to be the
Ukraine
prime minister
will
of
continue
Estonia.
to resist, and Europe will continue.
I think she
to
stepped
back
down to become the foreign
Ukraine.
minister of the EU, basically.
Well, you need Europe and Ukraine to also implement.
Hey.
So Estonia,
Missed that
is that
one.
a suburb in California?
Possibly. Not sure exactly.
And the agreement. So without us at the table, you can agree on whatever, but it will just simply fail because of the implementation.
Because the EU isn't there.
Any
no.
quick fix is a dirty deal that we have seen before when
Hey.
it comes to Minsk, for example, and it will just simply not work. If Ukraine decides to resist, Europe will back the principles, Europe will back Ukraine. Yes, with 20% less if US decides to withdraw, but still, Ukraine will defend the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the principles that also Europe stands for, and we are there together.
So her name's Kaja Kallas. I've got a bit more of her.
Membership in NATO is the strongest security guarantee there is, and actually it's also the cheapest security guarantee there is. If we are saying that it's not going to be NATO membership, but it's going to be some other security guarantees, then the question needs to be answered by everybody. What are these security guarantees really? Again, I would say that we shouldn't take anything off the table before the negotiations have even started, because it plays.
Yet Russia's being paranoid for thinking Ukraine's going to be put into NATO. Yet it's like, we can't even take that off the table. Ukraine really should be in NATO. And yeah, well, that's kind of part of the problem, though.
It's to Russia's court, and it is what they want. Why are we giving them everything that they want even before the negotiations have been started? It's appeasement. It has never worked.
Last question. How do you put these things back
Trump's
on the
just
table?
doing it quickly.
How does Europe
He's cutting to the
muscle
chase.
itself back to the table and put these options on the table again? Is that even possible?
No, again, I want to say that, if there is agreement made behind our backs, it will simply not work, because you need, for any kind of deal, any kind of agreement, you need Europeans to implement this deal. You need the Ukrainians to implement this deal. So, that doesn't also look good if somebody agrees something and, everybody else says that, okay, fine, you have agreed, but we will not follow this.
What agreement will work?
Ukrainians will.
What agreement will work, guaranteed to work, is if the United States says, you know what, we're no longer funding this war. So now you're effed. So you can do whatever you want. Europe, if you want to continue to fund the Ukrainian war, you go right ahead. But the fact is one of the big objectives is, in the name of a humanitarian effort, the U.S. does want to end the war because tens of thousands of people are dying. But the other part of that is the real thing that America wants, at the American citizens' demand, is that we quit funding this war. So ending it is just a byproduct of or a hopeful outcome. But at the end of the day, what Americans want is to quit funding and sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, because it doesn't benefit us. And we got our own problems here. And we're $36 trillion in debt and all the other things. So, suck it, Europe.
Yeah, and she's followed up. She met the Minister of Defense for Ukraine, who assured her that Ukrainians are standing firm and will not give up their freedom and territory. Europe will stand firm too and continue supporting Ukraine in their fight. When we played Hegseth before, basically letting them all know what's what, this guy was just off to the side, just having to take it all in without being able to say anything. This one, it's all in a different language, I think. But apparently Zelensky's saying, they won't accept any bilateral peace talks without their participation. And he mentioned, I did see this reported somewhere else. I do not accept that it was a priority to call Putin
quick,
first.
I got to correct this. Ukraine is Eastern Europe, just so we're clear. I thought I was losing my mind there for a minute. But Ukraine is a country in Eastern Europe. It's the second largest country in Europe after Russia, which it borders to the east and Northeast. Just so we're clear.
I suppose he could be saying it's more like the like geographically, yeah. It could be like the cultural thing or whatever. You know, because technically, some people might argue Russia's in Europe, maybe, depending on how you look at it. But they're definitely not a European country. And Ukraine, maybe culturally, they weren't sort of fully European. They weren't fully Russian. They were sort of like a buffer zone, like a borderlands. Technically, geographically, yeah, it is in Europe. But maybe he means like culturally, or with their values, they're not quite European.
I'll buy that.
Yeah, so that could be the thing. It just was funny with this video. Yeah, because Russia, probably right. Yeah. Just, I don't know. Does he look like he's on drugs or something? Or am I reading too much into that? Maybe it's just cold. I don't know.
He has a runny nose.
Anyway.
Wiped his nose one time.
Just throwing a bit of Russian propaganda. Because Russia, they have said he's on cocaine or something like that. Sorry.
So you're just busting out the foil hat. He rubs his nose one time, and now he's doing coke.
I've seen him rub it many times, okay? It wasn't just the one time. Okay, I could probably do a montage of the Zelensky nose sniffles or whatever. But anyway. Just throwing it out. I'm just asking questions. All right.
І ми не можемо говорити тільки про профіт, тому що так, ви знаєте, і ми не можемо говорити тільки про профіт. І ми не можемо говорити тільки про профіт, тому що так, ви знаєте, фінансисти, вони кажуть, в чому профіт? Так, interest, in English. Я йому кажу, зберегти просто життя ваших людей, тому що там десь...
He's saying, what's the interest, what's the justification? He's like, we want to save lives, and I think he's threatening the, if we're fighting them so you don't have to, because, otherwise Russia's going to press on and invade NATO countries, and then American soldiers will have to die. I think that's where he's going with this, the usual line. But it's all nonsense, I think.
Не знаю, десь 100 тисяч контингенту американського в Європі знаходиться. Просто вони будуть воювати. І не всі виживуть. Тому що це війна і тому що це русські. І ми не можемо говорити...
So I'm pretty sure like the context of that he's saying, because you have heard this before, that if we don't stop Russia and Ukraine, then Russia's going to invade NATO countries, which would mean US soldiers have to do the fighting. So that's sort of a kind of a lame argument to support Ukraine, because otherwise, American soldiers will die in war because Russia's going to keep on going, and I think it's all just hysterics. But a little more sense, we have Viktor Orban responding to EU, getting all upset. Yeah, so this is that same lady we just showed. Ukraine's independence and territorial integrity are unconditional, blah, 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 blah. And Viktor Orban says, this declaration is a sad testament of bad Brazilian leadership, from Brussels or whatever. While President Trump and President Putin negotiate on peace, EU officials issue worthless statements. You can't request a seat at the negotiating table. You have to earn it through strength, good leadership, and smart diplomacy. The position of Brussels to support killing as long as it takes is morally and politically unacceptable. How's that? Yeah. I think I got a couple more videos, but that's generally the response to the initial Hegseth Trump comments that made sense. They're all upset because they were a bit ridiculous.
Well, and I think, to end things on a high note, the fact is we are winning domestically and we are winning abroad, and literally the left can't keep up with Trump. Whether we're talking about, these international issues, the Ukrainian war is going to come to an end very soon. And a lot of people are going to be upset about that. The people that are going to be most upset about that is the military-industrial complex. And you know what? Who cares? Because we got to quit sending money back to. And here's the thing: we're sending all this money to Ukraine, but what they're doing, they're taking that money, they're sending it back here. They're buying all kinds of missiles, weapon systems, all these things, and then those same people that Lockheed Martin, they're the ones that are funding all of the campaigns and all of the propaganda that are going to be required to keep this war going. And that's the circular money laundering system that we have in the U.S., because that's what's really going on. And that's what we need to pay attention to. And people are waking up. And I think Doge is a big part of that. We didn't even really touch on some of the other crazy things that Doge has come out and found in the last couple of days. There's something like $2 trillion that they found that were going overseas in Social Security payments or something like that, medical payments. I don't know what it was. It was something crazy. Doge finds $2 trillion, 2.7 trillion.
Yeah, I think Trump's been saying stuff about the Pentagon waste too. He's coming for that, which would be amazing. I think there's one more presser which I have I don't know if we can play a little bit of.
I just want to clarify that it was 2.7 trillion on Medicare and Medicaid payments going overseas. $2.7 trillion that were sent into Medicare and Medicaid payments that we shouldn't be spending money on. We're just winning left and right, finding corruption left and right, rooting out the rats in our government.
Yeah, no, I'm here for it, as they say. But we won't have time. I had heaps of things saved, but we probably should start wrapping it up. But this one bit here in particular, so I'd recommend other people to even check out most of this presser because it's pretty good. But there were some bits here with Russia and China and Ukraine, which sort of warmed my heart as a sort of an anti-war kind of guy. So yeah, I think it's around here.
President Putin to attend the summit and President Putin to
side.
Do you expect the Russians and President Putin to attend the summit in Saudi Arabia?
Eventually, yeah. Not quite yet. It's a little early. They're having a meeting in Munich tomorrow. Russia is going to be there with our people. Ukraine is also invited, by the way. Not sure exactly who's going to be there from any country, but high-level people from Russia, from Ukraine, and from the United States.
Do you want to have Russia back to the G7, sir?
I'd love to have them back. I think it was a mistake to throw them out. Look, it's not a question of liking Russia or not liking Russia. It was the G8, and I said, what are you doing? You guys, all you talk about is Russia, and they should be sitting at the table. I think Putin would love to be back. Obama and a couple of other people made a mistake and they got Russia out. It's very possible that if that was the G8, you wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. And if I was president, you definitely wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. Russia would have never attacked Ukraine. But you ask a very good question, the G8. It used to be the G8 and then these people threw them out. And I was arguing with Trudeau and with numerous of the people. Actually, Prime Minister Abe, a great man from Japan, agreed with me 100%, and some of the others did too. But I got there, it was a G7, as you know. They had already been terminated. I think it would have been very helpful, and it still would be helpful to have Russia be a part of that mix. And I think if they were, I don't think you would have had the problem that you have right now.
Russia is part of the G20.
They kicked them out, of course, because they illegally annexed Crimea. I mean, how would you have responded if Russia invaded or took over?
They took Crimea during Obama. They took, well, now they're looking to take the whole thing. Then they took a big chunk of land and people, as you know, during Bush. And now they're trying to take the whole thing during
He means Biden, yeah.
Biden. You know, the only one that didn't give them anything is Trump. They never took anything with Trump. Nothing. Not 2 inches of property of land.
You could mean Bush with Georgia.
But Crimea was Obama.
Georgia was under Bush.
And then Bush gave him a lot, you remember. And then, in fact, it's a sort of a standard little phrase. And Biden's giving them everything because this is a war that shouldn't have been had. And the only one that didn't give him anything is Trump. It's the way it is.
What's the message from Wall Street about these tariffs? So there's been some nervousness on Wall Street about the impact.
So, I mean, there hasn't been very much, and I think it's going to make the United States stronger, and in many ways it could make other countries stronger too. You know, other countries want to have a strong United States. They want to have a strong America, and I think it's going to make us very, very strong, much stronger. And we have a lot of work we're doing on the military. Our military already, I've authorized some contracts to be built that are very substantial. We're building the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest military equipment in the world. We're building it. At some point, when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China, and I'm going to meet with Russia, in particular, those two. And I'm going to say, there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on military. There's no reason for you to be spending $400 billion. China's going to be at 400 billion. We're at $1 trillion. We're going to be at close to $1 trillion. And I'm going to say, we can spend this on other things. We don't have to spend this on military and I'm going to be meeting with China. You know, we were trying to de-escalate nuclear, and I was in a position where Russia had agreed and China had agreed we were going to start, and then we had a rigged election, so that never took place. But this one was too big to rig. We won by so much that it was too big to rig.
You want to do the China meeting in the United States, or would you travel to China for that?
For what?
A China meeting.
I tell people all the time, you know, the question is who's going to have the first meeting, where are you going to, I say this to Putin, to President Xi, I say to everybody, never bothered me, you know, I'm willing to say I'll go first.
Because this is where the threat of World War III is, war with Russia and China. If he's talking about let's get friends with Russia and China and maybe get all of us to reduce our weapons and even reduce our nukes,
as soon as things settle down,
amazing
I'm going to have that
in terms of
conference
peace and
primarily with
diplomacy.
China and Russia, because those are the two that really
By
are
the way,
there. And
that used to be the Democratic position. That used to be the Democratic position. Is that, you know, I remember in the 80s and early 90s where, you know, they were talking about, you know, I remember the Democrats talking about how Russia's actually not our enemy. You know, you had Bernie Sanders going over there getting married or whatever he did. He had a lot of Democrat politicians over there hanging out with Russians. And there were so many people saying that Reagan, you know, was a warmonger. He's trying to instigate a war, World War III with Russia, with his, you know, strength through peace ideology and policies. And, you know, it worked. But, you know, that was
now the same people are ready for a fight.
Yeah, the same ones that they're suddenly Russia is our worst enemy ever. And, you know, we got to put a stop to it, even if it means World War III and nuclear holocaust across the globe.
Yeah. I think it's either coming up or there's a tweet or a truth thing that Trump put out where he basically said, oh, there's no need to build any more nukes. And he's sort of tying in with this comment of, you know, let's talk to Russia and China and have all of us maybe reduce our weapons stockpiles. I know Russia has been pushing for sort of things like that before, and America's just rejected them all the time. Which seems crazy to me. If Russia's like, hey, let's have some kind of agreement where we both inspect each other's weapons and sort of like get rid of a whole bunch of them. Well, you know, you have to iron out the details, but the principle of just, we don't need that many weapons. We only have them because you have them, and there's sort of an arms race. If we can wind that back, you know, like it might be a little idealistic or whatever, but gee, it's worth a go. You know?
Yeah. Somebody was bringing up, one of the guys was talking about in Canada how it is, the debt is like $29,000 per person. When the U.S. is $106,000 per person, every man, woman, and child in the U.S. The U.S. debt is also known as the national debt or public debt. Total amount of debt in the U.S. government, the debt per person has increased by an average 5% every year since 2001. The U.S. debt has increased significantly over the past 30 years. In 1990, the debt was around $3.2 trillion, but in 2022, it surpassed $30 trillion for the first time. U.S. debt is 7.1 times the annual federal revenues. U.S. debt is 125% of the U.S. economic output, our total GDP, and the U.S. debt is 78% more than the combined consumer debt of every household in the U.S. So we're out of money, folks. I mean, I don't know.
Isn't it the case that because of that, you're paying more in interest per year than, I forget what the benchmark was, than all the military spending or something crazy, or maybe even more. I forget exactly what. But, you know, just so much money gets spent every year on the interest on that. And it seems like America, like the thing is, we'll just pay sort of that interest, but don't worry about getting the debt down at all, which is not very good economics or whatever. But I think we're getting ready to wrap up. I was going to finish with an appropriate plug, okay? Because many years ago, I spent quite a few years documenting the war breaking out in Ukraine in 2014. And even if you go to my Twitter, I've sort of got a summary of a lot of that. I won't play it here, but please go to @Chris.Nolan on Twitter. I've got a 25-minute summary here. And it is sort of fast-paced, and it's sort of got music. It's sort of done as a trailer, because my main video, which I mentioned here, 8 months in Ukraine, which you can search for on YouTube. That's a 5-hour video covering the 8 months from the coup to about halfway through 2014 in detail, sort of almost day by day in some points, hour by hour, how the war progressed. And if people don't have 5 hours, you got 25 minutes here. And yeah, even the way I sum it, I mean, this is an oversimplification. But you have an unelected government killing its own people in the southeast just after Joe Biden and John Brennan went there and would have sort of told them, okay, I'm assuming, but you watch and tell me what you think, people at home. It looked like Biden and Brennan from the CIA gave Ukraine a green light to launch the army. That, you had people wanting independence. Instead of negotiation, it's brute force, send in the army, and this is right on Russia's border, and it went on for years. And this part of the story isn't really told because there's a lot of Ukrainian war crimes in here. And there's one section in my videos where there's an airstrike in July 16 or something, July the 2nd, 2014. There's an airstrike in some village near Lugansk, and Ukraine, they flew in and they bombed this little village and just killed all these innocent people. And, there's a guy filming, a journalist, he's filming all the destruction. And this footage in the background is from the coup, basically. There's Nuland, she's there on the ground. Catherine Ashton from the EU. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. But after the coup and after the war kicked off, there's all this destruction and there's a news camera guy filming it. And one of the locals, he goes up to the reporter, he's like, who are you? Are you a Ukrainian journalist or a Russian journalist? Basically friend or foe almost at that point. And the guy's like, oh, I'm a Russian journalist. And he says to him, and I think it's one of the more important lines of the whole video, because he says something that probably won't make sense to people unless they're following all this. This guy basically says to the reporter, he goes, where is Putin? Why isn't he helping us? He's just sitting back and watching Ukraine bomb us, for months now. He's not going to do anything. And this guy said, I thought Putin had balls, but he has no balls. And he walks off in a huff. And for most people, that probably won't make any sense. It's like, what do you mean? A Ukrainian is like pissed off that Russia hasn't invaded. And that doesn't fit the narrative at all. But yeah, so I'd recommend if people want to know exactly how this kicked off, I've got years worth of research on this. This is a 25-minute summary of a 5-hour documentary, which in itself is a summary of a 17-part series I did that goes for over 20 hours. Like, I just went crazy with it. But the detail, Ukraine is definitely no dove in this. They definitely have a lot to answer for. And, they were doing a lot of the bombing for years. And now it's Russia's invaded and they're doing a lot of the, bombing and so, war crimes and things like this. But it's a complicated subject and I would highly recommend to that. There's also a book by Richard Sakwa called Crisis at the Borderlands. And I've always sort of said my videos plus that book, that'll give you probably the best knowledge of this whole situation, better than probably most people on the planet, at least that part of it. There's more geopolitical events going on. But that's just my little plug and backstory if people want to know where all this is coming from.
Well, folks, go check it out at Christopher Todd Nolan on X. And what's your channel?
Sorry, YouTube is Watchdog Media.
At Chris Todd Nolan. Chris Todd Nolan.
Yeah.
All right, there you go.
Yeah,
right.
And Watchdog Media is the channel. And the only other thing I have is a bit of Freemasonry. All right, I did mention before. They did some stupid video.
Of course, I take my regalia.
Whoops. It's just a stupid video of them trying to be cool.
I take my regalia case. I'm a Freemason. Of course, I take my regalia case everywhere I go.
I'm a Freemason.
These are my friends. I know them all well.
To the ritual during my daily conversation.
Just a goofy video.
It is found. I'm a Freemason. Of course I know all the words of the national anthem.
I don't think this is going to have the effect they want it to have.
I'm a Freemason. Of course I have several pairs of white gloves in my case, including ones that have really seen better days.
I'm a Freemason. Of course I forget my ritual on the day.
Can't think of any more, Chris.